Hello everybody and welcome to our first lesson for Russian history for GCSE history. Now, in this lesson we're going to take an introduction to the course that we're going to be studying. This is Russian history from the year 1894 to 1941. And we're going to be focusing on the Tsar himself, the final Tsar, that of Nicholas II in this lesson. And in the next few lessons we're also going to talk about the state of Russia when he became Tsar of the particular empire. So this is the first lesson in the series on Tsarist and Communist Russia for GCSE history. We're focusing on a period from 1894 to 1945. This is the period from the beginning of the reign of Nicholas II through to his abdication and the Russian Revolution of 1917. Through the Civil War to the rise of Lenin, and then the death of Lenin and the rise of Stalin, all the way towards the end of the Second World War. Now, the first thing we should note is the word Tsar itself. The word Tsar is a Slavic derivation of the word Caesar, and it refers to the monarch in a number of different Eastern European states, and this included the Russian Empire. Now, the first Russian monarch to ever use the word Tsar in relation to themselves, to actually call themselves Tsar, was that of Ivan IV, who was Ivan the Terrible. But this phrase was used by people as early as Vasily III in Russia, not necessarily themselves using it to describe themselves, but in correspondence and documentation we have the word Tsar written as early as Vasily III. Now, Nicholas II was the last Tsar of the Russian Romanov dynasty. Now, the Romanov dynasty lasted for a very long time. It lasted from the reign of Mikhail I in 1613 to the death of, or the abdication of Nicholas II in 1718. Now, as a very brief introduction, the history of Russia and the monarchal history of Russia can be divided into two main dynasties. You have the Rurikid dynasty, and then you have the Romanov dynasty. The Rurikid dynasty lasted a very, very long time, from around 900 AD, when the Viking Rurik came to rule over the Kievan Rus. They became part of the Principality of Moscow, the Muscovite Principality, and became Grand Princes of Muscovy, which was what existed before what becomes known as Russia. The Rurikid dynasty lasts all the way up to the death of Ivan IV, who is also Ivan the Terrible, and the reason why the dynasty ends there is because Ivan IV actually killed his own son in an argument, and there's a very famous painting depicting that scene. Now, at the end of the death of Ivan IV, we have what is known as a period of the Time of Troubles. Time of Troubles was a period where you have a number of different people claiming to be fake czars and claiming to be fake monarchs, and a lot of famine takes place and a lot of internal strife and civil war takes place until we get the Russian parliament. The Russian parliament that at the time was known as the Zemsky Sobor. They go and they elect Mikhail I to be the next Tsar and start the new dynasty that takes us all the way through to Peter the Great, through to Catherine the Great, through to Alexander II, and then to Nicholas II here. All of that was just very brief background. You don't need to know any of that for your GCSE, but it gives you a little bit of context. It gives you context of the sort of general structure of how Russia became what it is at the point at which we are starting to study, which is at the reign of Nicholas II. So in 1894, Nicholas II would be crowned Tsar of the Russian Empire and was labelled the Little Father of Russia. So he was a relatively popular character at the beginning of his reign. And just 23 years later, Nicholas II would be removed from power as the Russian Empire collapses and is replaced by the Soviet Union. So what we're going to do in the first series of these lessons is talk about how this takes place, how we go from a sprawling empire that was relatively unequal. It was a relatively unequal, a relatively autocratic society in a lot of different ways, but it goes from that to the removal of the Tsar from power and the creation and establishment of the Soviet Union under Lenin and then Stalin. Now, The Tsar would represent the supreme ruler of the Russian Empire, and the Russian Empire was one of the largest and most diverse empires in history. And this is one of the reasons why it potentially collapses, because only 40% of the members of the empire actually spoke Russian as a first language. Because the empire was so large, it encompassed so many different cultures and so many different languages, so many different religions, including people like Turks, Poles, Finns, Ukrainians, Cossacks, etc., etc., etc. All of these different groups have their own different cultures. They have their own different language, they have their own different religion, they have their own different practices and ways of life. And so to just take them all and put them under this one banner that we call the Russian Empire, of course, created a melting pot of all these different cultures and all these different ideas and languages. There was a lot of religious diversity. Of course, the most popular was that of Russian Orthodox Christianity, ever since Vladimir III chose the Christianity as a religion for his people. Now, the famous story in medieval Russia is that he was given the option of choosing between Christianity and Islam, and decided on Orthodox Christianity because it meant he was able to drink vodka, which is quite a nice story. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but it's quite a fun story for those who are studying Russian history. And so, essentially, the Orthodox Christianity becomes a very popular movement and really ties a lot of Russian culture together. Many were also Catholic. There was also a lot of different cultures like Islam as well in the sort of southern regions of the Russian Empire. And another thing that would continue to be an issue in a lot of Russia and a lot of Europe as a whole is this idea of anti-Semitism. There were a number of different pogroms in the reigns of Russian monarchs that existed before Nicholas II. So, for example, Alexander II and Alexander III really were very, very unpleasant places to live if you are a Jewish individual in this period. But as is the case, it was a very unpleasant place to live in all of Europe because anti-Semitism was a big problem during this time. Now, this series is going to be divided into 4 main periods, under which we'll explore the 3 major rulers. So we're going to start by talking about the period of Russian history under the reign of Nicholas II. We're then going to move on to talk about the collapse of this particular empire as through the Russian Revolution and the rise of Vladimir Lenin as the new leader. We'll then talk about the death of Lenin, the power struggle that takes place following the death of Lenin, and talk about the rise of Stalin. And then finally we'll focus on Stalin's Russia, leading all the way up through to and the end of the quote-unquote Great Patriotic War. To those in the West, we know that as the Second World War.